Hello, my friends, my fellow unpersons in the Unsafe Space community. I am filming this at the end of a long day, and it's one of those days in which, I'm not my best self. We all have days like that, and frankly, I've been struggling with a lot of misanthropy today. I'm in that mood where the dark side of myself is very visible. And it reminded me of a conversation I had with someone in our community recently who was struggling with something similar. And we recorded the conversation, but I haven't put it out yet. But I thought, you know what? This is the day to put it out. So I'm recording this on Saturday night. I'll put this conversation out tomorrow, Sunday. But the conversation you're about to hear is from a young man named Alan who was, he, like me, is a small. Well, I'm more of an anarchist. He's a minarchist, but small government kind of guy, but struggling with an a dark admiration or affinity towards Pinochet. Now, for those of you who don't know, Pinochet's the dictator in Chile who allegedly threw communists out of helicopters. Right? It's kind of a dark thing to have an affinity for Pinochet, but we all have these dark days, dark parts of ourselves. And today, I got off the phone with Carrie a little while ago. Today was it was my dark day. My dark self was visible. And so I was really relating to this guy today, this guy named Alan, who you're going to hear. Because, you know, it was a day that was difficult for me to remember why I'm fighting for Western civilization. And it was one of those days where I just kind of wanted to sit back and say, you know what? Society gets what it deserves. Let it burn. Now, I wouldn't be doing this show if that was how I actually felt fundamentally. Fundamentally, there's a reason that we're fighting to preserve the values behind Western civilization. There's a reason that we get up every day and do this and, you know, lose money and argue with social justice warriors and fight the fight. And it's because at the end of the day, I do think Western civilization is worth saving. I do think people are worth saving. There is love and creativity and goodness in the world, and there are great people doing wonderful things, people who love life and are really earnestly trying to be the best that they can be. But some days it's easy to forget that. And I suspect that I'm not alone, that we all struggle with this. And particularly during COVID, during this COVID stuff, Carrie mentioned this when I was talking to her earlier today. COVID's got us locked in our houses, increasing our online interactions and decreasing our person-to-person interactions. And online's a hostile place. There's spiteful, vindictive, mean people online. Not that they don't exist in real life, but in real life, face-to-face, people tend to be nicer to each other. There's not the anonymity, and it's much more pleasant to have in-person interactions, and we're all sorely lacking in-person interactions now because everyone's shut in their home and restaurants are closed and people aren't going to work, and so we're missing out on actual human interaction. And when we do see each other, we're wearing masks. So I think it's understandable that people may be struggling with this. Maybe I'm the only one. I don't know, but I suspect not. I suspect that we're all sometimes just kind of getting burnt out on this thing, and that's when we're vulnerable to that dark side of us and those dark feelings to surface. And so I don't think it's healthy to ignore the fact that they exist. We all have a dark side. I certainly do. and thankful for friends like Carrie who helped me deal with it today. But it does exist. It's good to admit and understand that it exists, and not let it control you, and just let it make you powerful and give you the energy to fight for what is good in the world, and what is worth fighting for, and that is the values of the Enlightenment. That is individualism, freedom, individual rights, freedom of speech. All these things are worth fighting for. And that's why I do this. Anyway, that was a long, unscripted, rambling introduction, but here's my conversation with Alan, in which he wrote into me and wanted to talk about his flirtation with Pinochet, and here's our conversation about it. So I hope that you enjoy it. I hope you have a wonderful Sunday, and if you do have some of that dark side surface, just remember, not all humans are horrible people. Not all humans are out to get you. Not all humans are mean and spiteful. The internet does not represent. It's not a representative sample of humanity. Go have some face-to-face interaction with good people in your life to keep your spirits high and to remind you why life is worth living and fighting for, and preserving and defending. So, have a good day, everyone. With that, here's my conversation with Alan.
So, hey Carter. As I'm watching the Cultural Revolution start to progress through society, and the more that I see the sort of subversion that Yuri Bezmenov had talked about, the more I start to question whether a peaceful solution is really possible. I still hold out hope that it is, but I don't know. During one of Yuri Bezmenov's lectures, he talks about after you get past, I think it's the destabilization phase, you need a strong man, and he states, like in Chile.
I didn't realize he referenced Pinochet.
Yes, he did. Okay. In order to drag the country back. And, Pinochet is a very strange character in history, with the authoritarian social policies that he took, but the rather libertarian economic policies that he took. And, as things get more violent in the streets, and as we're renaming streets and destroying statues and taking art out of the general consciousness because it's any number of buzzwords, things are starting to look a lot like, again, the Cultural Revolution. One of the best sources that I've found for it is Frank Decatur. I'm pretty sure that's how you say his last name. His book, The Cultural Revolution: A People's History, 1962 to 1976. Now, don't get scared. It's not a people's history like Howard Zinn's. Decatur is I think he's the head of the history department in Hong Kong University. And his Cultural Revolution book takes documents from the Chinese archives, firsthand accounts from people who lived through it, a bunch of other historical sources to try and piece together what happened. And a lot of it is really similar.
Yep. To what's happening now in the U.S., you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's the propaganda from the media. There was it was university led. There was the struggle sessions, which is kind of similar to what we're seeing happen mostly online now. But I think that's just because that's where the world is. There was definitely, we've talked about it before on the show. There was definitely an erasing of history that was similar, and there's just a lot of parallels that are similar. So I agree with you that that's what it appears is happening in the U.S. right now. And not only do I agree with you, more importantly, I know several Chinese who lived through the Cultural Revolution who agree with us that that's what's happening in the United States right now.
Oh, yeah. I remember you had Benjamin Boyce on your show at least once, possibly multiple times. And he had done an interview on his channel with one of Brett Weinstein's students who happened to be a Chinese foreign exchange student. It was either an interview he did or he was talking to her after the fact without actually interviewing her. Anyway, he had talked about how her parents had lived through the Cultural Revolution and that she was terrified when she was at Evergreen because she realized she was living through what her parents lived through.
Yep. Yeah. So let's circle this back to what your personal concern is too, because I think we're all in agreement. At least a lot of people that watch this show are in agreement that there's something like a cultural revolution happening in the U.S. right now. I know you mentioned Pinochet, but why don't you get into a little bit more of the personal question that you had about it?
Okay, well, I mean, it's quite simple. How do you stop a communist revolution without authoritarian overreach by a right-wing government?
Right.
Because I don't have an answer to that.
Right. And from your message to me, it sounds like you're struggling with, quote, keeping the faith you describe yourself as a minarchist, right?
Yes. Yeah, I very much dislike government overreach and just about everything. But as this cultural revolution progresses, as things get more violent on the streets, as the riots continue, I have a really hard time, trying to think of a way that individuals without the government can stop it. Now, obviously, people like you can help with it by speaking out against it, but that only does so much when that's in a discursive, I think that's the word, or a space of discourses, whereas on the ground, things are happening where your voice isn't going to reach people, and you can't really talk sense into people when they're in a giant mob tearing things down.
That's true. That is 100% true. So, let me start by saying one high level thing that I want to emphasize with you, because I know you're, struggling with this personally, and I feel like you've got a little bit of like, I'm guilty for having these thoughts, almost like I'm a minarchist. Why am I fantasizing about Pinochet and helicopters?
Yeah, a little bit.
Right. And the reason I want to take this, one of the reasons I want to talk to you about this is, I totally relate to that. I've joked about helicopters before, and which is a sort of a dark humor, right? Because the reference, for those who don't know, the reference is Pinochet throwing commies out of helicopters, right? He was the strong man who was propped up by the U.S. actually, to fight socialism, and he did it very violently. And so, look, I think at the outset, I would say, I don't know if you're Catholic, but like, I'm not Catholic. I'm not a religion that believes that you should feel guilty for thoughts and feelings. Like, if you never have thoughts of violence against your enemies, you're probably just lying to yourself. Everyone has those thoughts. What makes you moral is what you do with those thoughts, right? You can hate on your neighbor for something emotionally, and then what you do with that. Do you try and heal from it and like figure out how to re-engage with your neighbor in a more peaceful way, or maybe disengage from your neighbor in a peaceful way? Like, do you handle it in a moral way, or do you go grab the axe and go next door? Like, those are two different behaviors, and it's the behaviors that need to be judged, not your feelings about stuff. So one of the reasons I sometimes joke about Pinochet and helicopters is I absolutely have dark thoughts sometimes about the goddamn commies and like the crazy Marxists that just want to run my life and ruin the lives of everyone I love around me and treat us like slaves and believe that we're their fodder to be used for whatever, utopian idealistic cause they've got in their head. It's vile, and it deserves to be hated, and it makes sense that there's a sometimes a visceral response of like wanting to do violence. But I don't do violence, and I don't advocate doing violence against them because that's not the proper course of action. So that's the one thing I'll say. The other thing I'll say is, and this is again by way of like forgiving yourself. I really don't like unearned guilt. I don't like people feeling guilty. A lot of times, the best people feel guilty for things that they shouldn't, and the worst people just don't have any sense of guilt at all. And so, if you're gonna fight the worst people, you have to you have to get rid of your unearned guilt that you don't have. So you don't need to feel guilty for, liking Pinochet memes or thinking about helicopters once in a while. That's fine. That's natural. And I would say that's a healthy response because your life is literally, if someone is spouting Marxism and communism and actually has control, if they're a crazy bum on the street talking to themselves, then they don't have any control. But if your leaders and institutions with power over you are literally spouting this crap, they are threatening your life. I mean, like you are being threatened. So feeling that is totally natural and normal, and we shouldn't pretend that it's just words and that words have no meaning and that they have no connection to reality. Words are what justify this stuff. Words are what gets. I mean, yeah, people like Stalin and Mao used violence, but the culture that supported them, the way that they rose to power. I mean, Hitler used words.
Oh yeah,
it's a great example. Hitler was elected. He used words to get to the power where he could then use violence. So that's okay that you feel that way. The last thing I'll say about I don't know if this is even the last thing. The other thing I'll say about this is I don't judge someone too harshly if they believe in individual rights, if they have dedicated themselves like to the moral foundations of the Enlightenment, like if they've got the right kind of moral compass, and they are under duress, like, and that could be anything from a hostage situation, like literally, or it could be they're under duress because there's an entire oppressive state with men with guns who will do things to them that are immoral. I have a hard time judging them harshly for the reaction that they think is most rational, both from a strategic and a tactical perspective. We can argue about what the strategic and technical perspectives are, but the idea that it's somehow immoral to entertain the idea of using counterforce, get that out of your head. It's not immoral. It might be dumb and impractical,
right?
But it's not immoral. You are under duress. And you're more under duress the more this country becomes an authoritarian hellhole. So I think everyone would agree that if you were stuck in Nazi Germany, armed conflict would be against the authorities would be completely okay.
Right.
So, and there's grades of that is my point. And it's up to each person to make that decision themselves about when is it okay to support actual violence. So I'll put all that stuff aside for a minute and let's talk about the Pinochet and political thing. A couple questions. One, what are you trying to save?
Well, I mean, as you had described earlier, I mean, the Enlightenment, the basic concept of individual rights, the Constitution's a nice one too.
Okay.
Our country was allowed to become what it is and what it has been because of the focus on individual rights, the focus on the Constitution. Then also, I mean, individual and negative rights are kind of synonymous, but a focus more on negative rights, which is why I have major problems with like the Great Society and the New Deal and all that, because they're
a corruption of the concept of rights.
Yes, exactly. And at a very base level, I want to save freedom of expression because I'm the kind of dude that gets shot in those sort of regimes. So
you and me both. Okay. So I agree with all that. I want to save all those things too. It's probably why you're part of the Unsafe Space community.
Right.
However, If I said to you, you need to be very concerned about preserving all of those things in Pakistan, what would you say to me?
It's hard to preserve something that wasn't there to begin with.
Okay. That's good. Now, if I was to say to you, you need to preserve all of those things in downtown San Francisco, what would you say to me?
That's going to be a tough one. But I think it could be possible. I mean, I try and be optimistic about these things. I guess it would depend on just now. Granted, I don't know what the demographics are like around San Francisco, not just in the center of the city, but around it. But I mean, if it's anything like New York, you have one blue area surrounded by a ton of red areas.
Right.
So maybe you could try getting the people in those areas around it to rally and slowly change the culture within the city instead of the opposite of how it normally goes with the city changing the culture around it. Again, I don't know if that's possible. It might be too optimistic, but
well,
actually,
hold on. The reason for my question, though, was
I know where you're going.
I want you to limit just that blue, the darkest blue area you can think of, like the most commie area, Berkeley.
Right.
Save Berkeley, please.
Okay, well, first I'd have to make the assumption that there's people there that want to be saved, which I'd hope there are at least a couple. And
there's probably a few.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the main answer to that might be a state or federal level intervention, because the state is there, especially in the case of the property destruction that goes on, because one of the things that the state is supposed to do is protect your property rights.
Right.
So.
Do you think there's anyone in Pakistan who is just as much of a minarchist as you who would like to be saved?
Probably.
Okay. The reason I'm asking this is I don't think so. At the beginning, we talked about you wanted to save Enlightenment values, which I do as well. I don't want to, how do I want to put this? It would be nice for the entire United States to embrace Enlightenment values again. And you can say that there's a foundation for them. That's kind of true, but that foundation has been lost for generations and generations. So there's not like a cultural foundation really.
Right.
Too much. So it would be nice. Frankly, it would be nice if the whole world embraced enlightened values. We would be all much richer and have better standards of living and happier and would have more free time and would have flying cars. Like if the whole world embraced Enlightenment values, we would be much better off as a planet. But I'm not Jesus. My job's not to save humanity.
Right.
At least not in my lifetime. And I don't know that. Well, I strongly believe that it's not possible to save people who do not want to be saved.
Yes, that's why I made the caveat earlier about how you'd need people that would want to be saved in Berkeley.
Right. And just imagine for a second, let's say you saved, just because it's, I guess, driving distance from Berkeley. Let's say you saved Nevada, the next state over, right? Nevada became a haven for the Enlightenment values. Well, people from Berkeley could move there, right?
Yeah.
What's happened to the United States for the last several generations? Where do all the freedom lovers from the world, where have they gone?
What do you mean? Like a specific state? Or just...
Well, a country. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but I know people from Africa and Asia and Europe, all of whom grew up yearning for freedom And where did they go?
Here.
They all came here. So I think before we worry about saving a particular geographic area, because here's my particular concern.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be nice to save a geographic area. It'd be nice if that area was the U.S. I don't think you realize how grave the threat is. The threat is that the ideas themselves will be extinguished.
Oh, yes. So I am very familiar with that, because I mean, the U.S. is a geographic area, but unlike any other nations, it is a set of ideas. It's not necessarily a people like a lot of other nations are.
Right.
And without those ideas, we're nothing. You know?
Yeah. And, you know, I it's kind of silly to think, especially in the modern day of the internet, that you could ever have the burning of the library at Alexandria again. However, visit China.
Right.
Suppression of the internet is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, stuff leaks out, and there's you know, VPNs and people exchanging information, but it's much harder to keep that information alive, and it's not impossible that the ideas of the Enlightenment just get so lost that it takes hundreds of years to recover. And we're in a culture, again, I'm not trying to be a pessimist, but we are in a culture which is diametrically opposed to the Enlightenment ideas. Almost every major cultural institution is opposed to the Enlightenment ideas. I don't think all the people are. Mm-hmm. And I do agree with you. There are people, probably even in Berkeley, who want to be saved, right? Who want the Enlightenment to continue. But the battle that I'm fighting is to save the ideas, not to save people who don't want to be saved.
Right.
And so if I look at the idea of a strong man, if I look at a Pinochet, right? First of all, okay, he threw a bunch of commies out of helicopters, and I guess he stopped some socialist progression there. But is Chile great now?
Not really, no.
Did the culture change against socialism? I mean, I actually think it maybe was bad that he brought he had, so people who don't know, he brought the students of Milton Friedman, actually,
yep,
like some kind of free market economist people in to help with some of the economic reforms. Now, he didn't implement them completely. Like, they kept control of the copper mines, for example, the government,
right,
and that kind of stuff. But they did return a lot of previously nationalized private property. And so he did some things that economically minarchists would cheer, right? Not everything he did economically, but some things he did economically.
It was better than the alternative that was rising at the time.
Right, although...
economically speaking.
Yeah, although some of the people that I know who hate communism the most lived under it. So
okay.
What's happened to Chile now? I don't know, because now Pinochet was a lot of evil mixed with some of this decent economics. Well, the whole thing is painted as bad now. So now he's given a bad name to free market economists because his name is attached to them. And I don't know what Chile's culture is like right now, but I bet it's not yay laissez-faire free market capitalism. He hasn't killed he didn't kill socialism culturally. He killed a few commies, but I don't know that was good in the long term for Chile's development.
Right.
I think you could make a case that Chile's society is worse off. Now, he may have also saved lives. Obviously, if Chile had gone complete communist, you would have had just as much death and human rights violations. It just would have been the other side doing it and different people dying. So, you know, it's a tragedy almost either way, and that's because a culture that doesn't understand Enlightenment values is a tragedy in and of itself. It's just a tragedy. It's going to end up, there's going to be innocent deaths.
Right.
So I don't know that Pinochet was good in the long run. Like, I get that there's a short run, like, oh, he got rid of some commies. And even if you're anti-communist, I still don't know that that was the best way. Maybe Chile should have just totally hit rock bottom, right? Like a drug addict. Maybe Chile should have just been allowed to totally hit rock bottom, destroy itself with its stupid Marxist ideas. And maybe the people would come out of that hating Marxism, and we would have a beacon of freedom emerging in South America. That would have been lovely.
Right.
I mean,
but
that didn't happen.
And I mean, you do bring up a good point, and I'll admit that's the other major way of doing things that I've thought of, is just let it happen. And hopefully people will come out of it, as you said, on the other side, hating those Marxist ideas. And I definitely agree with you that Pinochet did engage in a lot of evil. And you make a really good point that in doing so, it makes it really easy for propagandists to take everything that he did and put it under that umbrella of evil.
Milton Friedman himself has been attacked because of his association with Pinochet.
Really? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I don't know that he may have met Pinochet a couple times, once or twice. I'm not sure, but like he wasn't, he didn't roll up his sleeves and move to Chile and fix the economy, right? He wasn't that into it. He gave advice, and maybe the for the Christians in the audience, like maybe the biblical phrase is pearls before swine, right? he told swine how to have a better economy. Okay, it worked, but was it good in the long run? I don't know. But the world is always going to be full of people who, well, let's hope maybe not full of, but there will always be people in the world who are psychologically predisposed to hate individual responsibility, liberty, and freedom. There's are always going to be. There's going to be people who want to dominate other people, and there's going to be people who want to be dominated. And right now, that's most of the world. Mm-hmm. Most of the world wants to be a slave to some master or a master themselves. And that's how they view the world. They view the world as not equal exchanges between equal individuals who can voluntarily and to their mutual benefit exchange things. They view the world as domination between one party and another. You win. If you win, I lose. If I win, you lose. That's the way it is. Yep. And those people have no place in a free society. That mentality does not belong in a free society at all. But that mentality is all over the place. And so if your rule is, how do I take an arbitrary geographical area and turn it into a bunch of people who don't have that mentality, I think you're setting yourself up for failure.
Right.
I think a better question is, how do I find a bunch of people with an enlightenment mentality, a bunch of individualists, and how do we get together and set up a society for ourselves, maybe, probably in the US somewhere, but how do we set this up in a way where we know that those other people exist in the world, but we don't really have to do anything about it except for protect ourselves against them, right? But we're all in it together, and we're here, and we don't have that problem within our own community. And I think that was the vision for the United States. Mm-hmm. But obviously that vision was not met fully, even at the beginning. And certainly, while there have been some improvements, there's also been massive backsliding to, we use the good ideas to improve the actual status of many people. The abolition of slavery being the obvious example. But we simultaneously started abandoning the philosophic foundations that allowed us to be abolitionists in the first place. So, I guess I'm going to throw this back at you. Like, what's your fantasy about a Pinochet person in the U.S.? What would happen? What would you support that you are worried about feeling guilty about supporting in the U.S.?
Well, I would like to avoid genuine killings, because that's bad, okay? The old meme quote, if you kill your enemies, they win. which, you know, you kind of just talked about with Pinochet doing that, and now Chile, the sort of free market economy or economics are now demonized, right? I would hope for a clearing out of institutions. I don't know exactly how to go about that. I mean, there's a couple things that might be useful. One possible strongman thing to do, and this doesn't require any military intervention right away or anything like that. Are you familiar with the Communist Control Act of 1954, I think?
Was that what McCarthy used? I don't remember. I'm not familiar with it, but
so
I'm trying to link it.
Basically all it did was make it so that any members of the Communist Party in the USA could not serve in an elected or appointed office. If I remember correctly, it also applied to derivative groups. And I think expanding that to, say, the DSA might be a way to help curb some of it. Yeah.
Well, here's, again, this is just getting back to the unsafe space philosophy here. The Constitution's not bad. Like, our freedoms are laid out pretty clearly, aren't they?
Right.
Do we follow it?
Rarely anymore.
So do you think another law written on a different piece of paper with men enforcing it who are worse than the founders is going to help?
I mean, hey, you asked me what my authoritarian fantasy was.
Oh, I see. That's your authoritarian fantasy.
Yes. In reality, I understand exactly where you're going with that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to push back on the idea that Pinochet was a strong man, because we've been using that argument.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't think he was a strong man. I think he was a pathetic puppet.
Of the CIA and the U.S. government.
Well, look, he enriched himself quite a lot. He didn't approach this with I don't like communism because and I don't like socialism because I'm a freedom lover, an individualist. That was not his philosophy.
Right.
He was like, if there's going to be a king, I want to be a king. And how do we make the economy a little bit more successful so that I can get richer and people can be richer generally, because that's better for my country? It's very Chinese, actually. Like, if you look at modern day China, like, yeah, they opened up their economy in many ways because they wanted to run an efficient tax farm. That's what Pinochet wanted. He wanted to run an efficient tax farm, and he partly wanted to just enrich himself. And he wasn't led by he wasn't a moral man led by moral ideas that had the balls to stand up for what was right. He was just a little brute who happened to be in the right place at the right time, and was smart enough to realize that if he pushed socialism on the economy, he would have, he'd be ruling a poorer country than if he asked for Milton Friedman's help.
Right. And that's a very fair point. I use the term strongman just because, like, it's usually how dictators are termed in historical vision, I guess.
Well, the reason I want to push back on it, though, is because I like the idea and I want to reapply it to someone else.
Okay.
So I don't think your enemies win just because you kill them.
Right.
If you're killing them in self-defense, and you can morally, like, if you're killing them because they're trying to kill you, that you're not sacrificing any moral principles for that. In fact, you're upholding moral principles, and it's a moral thing to do. Self-defense is moral. Violent self-defense is moral.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you want a strong man, I think a strong man nowadays, an actual strong man, would be someone willing to say, to draw a line in the sand and say, all right, Marxist giant deep state government, all right, authoritarians, this is the line. You cross it, I defend myself. And I do it to the death. That's a strong man.
Right.
Doing it on principle.
Mm-hmm.
That's a strong man. And I do think we could use a strong man like that. I think if he did it by himself, it would be blue suicide. So I do think it's necessary to build a community. You don't want to be by yourself trying to prevent the authoritarian government from destroying the Enlightenment completely. Right. But if you're with millions of other Enlightenment lovers, well, you have a chance. You have a chance to fight for it. So, and those people, well, there's going to be, I mean, there would be violence if it turned into, like, let's just imagine, I just interviewed the Free State Project, a woman from the Free State Project named Carla Garrick. Let's imagine New Hampshire secedes. Let's imagine it's full of libertarian types, minarchist types. Let's imagine it secedes and the federal government says, nope, we're going to send in the army. Well, you need a strong man, right? I mean, not a dictator, but like you need strong men defending New Hampshire if that happens. Like, you can't have a bunch of people who are like, well, I just want to talk about it. They have to be willing to fight. So there is something admirable about that. And I think the admiration for Pinochet, the kind of like the dark admiration for Pinochet that exists right now, is we are living in a culture in which there are no men, largely. Masculinity has been dead for a couple generations. So there's very few men who are willing to say, yeah, actually, when people come to violate my rights, responding with force is the honorable thing to do. I think we need to regain that, because that sense of masculinity is what protects societies from Genghis Khan, right? But that's the kind of person that I think that we need. Those are the kind of people. I won't say that's a person. We don't want a dictator. But those are the kind of people. Those are the men we need, not Pinochets. We need men willing to throw communists out of helicopters in the middle of a war because the communist is trying to kill them, right? That's what we need.
You can't preemptively do it.
Right. But there's not a lot of preemption in a, I mean, I don't know if this is going too far for the show, but like, if we're in an environment where an officer of the opposing forces says, yes, go ahead and bomb your town, you can shoot the officer as soon as he's given the order. Like, you don't have to wait, right? As soon as there's threat of force against you, you can shoot. So, I think we've become a society that's too afraid of violence, because we view violence as, and actually the wrong people are too afraid of violence, right? The left is fine with violence, right? But the people on the right are afraid of violence. They don't want to have violence because they're trying to be civil, which is great. But at some point, this isn't going to be civil anymore, and we definitely need people who are willing to step up and find their inner Pinochet, at least in that respect.
And that is one of the things that I fear, is the collapse of civility. I mean, we've been heading towards it for a while now. And, this is one of the fun pieces of history that often gets written out of the history books or skipped over, is that every time, or just about every time, that there was a fascist dictator rising in the 20th century, there were communists trying to start a revolution in that state that at least helped, if not caused, the fascists to rise to power. It happened.
That's the origin of Antifa, right?
Yep, exactly. The anti-fascist action in Germany.
Yeah. Well, and so it's understandable, right? Because I think people with a healthy self-esteem hate Marxism.
Yeah.
I honestly, I don't even think it's an IQ thing. I think it's just a psychological thing. If you have a healthy self-esteem, Marxism is repugnant to you. And, it's scary when Marxists start getting violent and talking about owning your life and treating you like a slave and making you part of the Borg. So it makes sense that they turn to fascists, because the fascists are the only ones that are standing up saying, yeah, we'll fight them. But we need liberty-minded people to say, yeah, well, we will fight them. And as far as I know, I'm not a
history expert, but as far as I know, the closest thing we ever had to that was the founding fathers, who said, yeah, we will fight, right? We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honors. We will fight. But I've never seen anything like that since. I don't know. Do you know of examples in history where that's happened?
I mean, I guess you could say a bit of the Civil War. Because,
maybe.
You were extending freedom to people that should have had it but didn't. It was still based on principles, unless you're going to take the argument that it was, federal government overreach, which I'm not the biggest fan of. But
I think a lot of people, regardless of what you can argue that Lincoln's motivations were, I definitely think a lot of people were fighting for the cause that of ending slavery. Like there was definitely a lot of abolitionists in the North believing slavery was abhorrent. And in fact, they were there at the founding of the nation, as you know. Like there was an argument, even when during the drafting of the Declaration of Independence, it was originally drafted to be a treatise to include arguments against slavery, and South Carolina refused to sign unless those were removed. So, it by no means were all of the states pro-slavery at the beginning of the nation.
But you're right. Well, there genuinely aren't that many examples of people standing up and being actually willing to fight.
Well, but the hope that you're giving me is both the examples that we've cited in history came from America.
Right.
So that's good.
This is true.
I definitely think it will be here. And there are people here. It's not... there are actually men who will stand up and fight. They do exist. It's just that they're not very prominent. They don't have large voices. They aren't given a lot of press. And I think a lot of normies just don't know about them. But they do exist. There are people who are willing to do that. It's probably high time that we all circled wagons together and made sure that we are building the kind of community that doesn't require a Pinochet to stop the Marxists, but can stop the Marxists on our own without creating some sort of horrible dictatorship. I don't know if that's helpful at all. I mean, do you still feel like you're tempted to have... you can still go fantasize about Pinochet, I guess, if you want to. But are you... Like, are you just worried that it will happen? Or are you tempted that you, like, want it to happen?
I mean, on my worst days, I'm tempted. And I use worse as in, like, when the riots were first kicking off, I had like 6 or 7 streams of different cities going at the same time and just watching everything burn and people's lives being destroyed and hearing the same rhetoric that I've heard in classes and heard at Evergreen and that sort of stuff. It kind of tempted me. But a lot of it is fear that is the only way, or that is the most probable way.
Well, in terms of it being the only way, I don't think a moral person can say that's the only way unless they've tried the other ways. And the other ways including moving to a state with everyone else, trying to oppose it with strong people who are liberty-minded. Like, all that stuff needs to happen. Is it the inevitable? That I don't know, and I don't want to be pessimist, but I don't want to be overly optimistic. Maybe. I mean, history does show. That's one of my concerns I have with what's happening is the people on the right becoming more comfortable with the idea of any sort of strong person to stop the communists. And I get that we want the Marxists stopped. I get that that's good, but in some sense, but I don't know that that's the best path forward for us. I don't know that it ends well for liberty folks either, right?
No, I agree that historically speaking, it really doesn't.
Right. So you might not be the first to be lined up against the wall and shot, but you're on the list.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So, the commies get thrown out of the helicopter, you get starved to death 10 years later, but it's still bad.
Yes.
Right.
Now, I have a question for you, and this is about the Free State Project that you had brought up previously.
Sure.
And the possibility of, say, the federal government saying, no, you can't secede. How do I phrase this correctly? I guess, do you genuinely think that you could stop the force of the U.S. government? Because here's the thing, right? So if you were to have, and like, I really do like the idea of creating a community of people that are liberal-minded and all that, in the classical sense of the word. But if we are to allow the commies to take over the U.S. government as it stands and go off to our own little space, how do you defend against the might of the U.S. government trying to reclaim a state?
Well, I don't know that you can, so I don't want to make it sound like, that would work. I think that there's probably some strategy that needs to be involved with respect to when you secede. You want to do it at a moment when the United States is weak and preoccupied.
Right.
So, there's some strategy involved with that. You may want to get allies, right, before you do that, right? So even the American Revolution needed France.
Right.
Not that France would be a good ally for this, but, you may need some allies. You do have a little bit of advantage that, although maybe the Civil War is a counter argument to what I'm about to say, but you do have a little bit of an advantage that I don't see, I don't see regular people, even in a socialist America, I don't see regular people saying, level Manchester.
Right.
I don't know that killing the population of New Hampshire is something that would go over well.
Right. And I agree with that. And I understand that there are various tactics that one could use. I spent a lot of time reading Mao's Little Red Book, so I could know exactly what I was talking about when it came to communism. And, the dude brings up some good points about guerrilla warfare. And, us fighting in the Middle East shows that guerrilla warfare definitely can work. But, at the same time, how long does that go on for? Do you reach a state of eternal warfare because, you have this giant government sitting next to you controlled by communists, and you're playing the rebels? You could win eventually, maybe, but...
Well, I'll ask you this. What are the alternatives?
I mean, we kind of went over one of them earlier, but other than that, there aren't many.
Right.
So, trust me, I get what you're saying, and I definitely like the impulse. My only concern is that if we just go, can I swear?
Yeah.
If we just go fuck off to our own little state and we let the federal government fall, we might be screwed. And that's what I'm afraid of.
If we have a Pinochet in the federal government, though, he's not going to be better than Marxists that are in the federal government, right? So, I get that, but again, it's. I guess what you're asking is can we subvert the federal government somehow so that they will leave us alone? If there's a way to save the federal government in the entire United States, then we do that first. I think there's a lot of people who believe that that's probably beyond hope at this point. So then the question's okay, well, if we're going to have to secede, what do we need the U.S. federal government to be like in order for us to survive and leave us alone? I don't know the answer to that question, but maybe we do have to be doing something in the federal government. I mean, maybe we'd still have allies in the U.S. that we would need to run for office or do something more surreptitious. I mean, at that point, we're in a state of war. So in a state of war, you can do kind of whatever you want. Like
Right.
if they're attacking us, there's kind of like no holds barred at this point. And, you know, I would say if the only chance for freedom to survive is that there needs to be 100-year war where New Hampshire or some state barely survives for 100 years, but they emerge and freedom emerges at the end of it. Okay, that's better than that's better than freedom dying completely.
Right.
So like here's the thing. I do have hope that in the long run, reality always wins in the long run. Marxism is anti-reality.
Mm-hmm.
Socialism is anti-reality. It is broken. It will not work. In the long run, we will win. The question is it 1,000 years from now? Because that's a really long time.
Yeah.
And so bad ideas can survive for quite a long time. They can mooch off of the good ideas. That's what's happening in the U.S., right? The U.S. was a good idea that built a lot of wealth, and now that wealth is being used to enable the destruction of the very principles that made that wealth possible. So that could go on for quite some time. But eventually that implodes. So the question is, can we save it in some area? Can we save those ideas in some area kind of perpetually?
Right.
And the answer might be no. There's no really cool moral law of the universe that's like wherever there is on Earth, there will always be some place for freedom lovers. Like, nope, that's not a law of the universe. Like, you may all be dead. That could happen. It might be that every book that even references the Enlightenment is wiped out completely forever. And someone has to rediscover it hundreds of years from now. I mean, I don't think that's likely, but like anything is really possible. There's no moral law to the universe that we can rest on with reassurance that things will be good for our kids or for our generation, our kids or our grandkids. But we do know in the end that we know our ideas are correct. We know in the end the ideas will win. So now the question is like, okay, well, what can we do in our lifetimes and for the lifetimes of our next immediate generations to preserve as much of that as possible? So I'm not against actually continuing to try and fight the culture war in the U.S. because I think we do need the culture in the U.S. to survive with as much remnants of Enlightenment values as possible for as long as possible, even if eventually it's going to fall. Because, there are different versions of Marxism. Like you could end up with a European style socialism that has no interest in invading New Hampshire.
Right.
Or you could end up with full-blown communism that, definitely wants to annex New Hampshire. And so the culture of the U.S. matters regardless of whether you move to a particular state and want to secede. So that the cultural war needs to continue to be fought, even if you're in a place that's going to secede.
Right. And that focus on the culture war is very important. I mean, so gaming out, your everybody moved to New Hampshire thing.
Right.
If we are able to,
again, by the way, I just want to be clear. I'm not pushing New Hampshire right now. It's on a list of states I'm considering, but
right. Just using New Hampshire as an example. Right. Everybody moved to a state or maybe a couple states bordering each other. If we are able to fight the culture war and change enough people's opinions within other states, at the very least, that might give pockets of resistance that could be useful.
Yep.
And, I think that the culture war is by far the most important part of politics right now. I've been really focusing on linguistic propaganda. You had talked about words earlier, and there's so much of it right now. All the different words that the left uses and twisting definitions and creating their little newspeak. And I've been doing my best to change or at least get people to question the ideology around me. It makes me a little bit hopeful because I just came out of college in a rather left-wing state, and there was quite a bit of Marxist subversion going on there, and there's about to be a little bit more coming because of the BLM activities and the George Floyd riots and all that. We're going to be hanging a Black Lives Matter flag in our student union.
Of course.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you don't have one already.
Fair enough. But the amount of people there, both students and a couple faculty and a decent amount of just the normal workers there, that saw something wrong. Like, one of the best examples that I had was one of the people I was working with. I was talking to them about how gender studies there's something broken with it. And she then told me about a student that she had worked with who was completely normal and then went into that class and came out with the brainworms and acted completely different. Started calling everybody out for everything, started having horrible depression, anxiety, etc. Normal people are noticing it. They just don't know where it comes from, how to classify it, how to fight it, etc.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the reasons I actually think it's important to have again, let's just use New Hampshire as an example, but if you have a place so people are generally very bad at imagining things being radically different from the way they are.
Right.
This is how kind of culture changes over time, right? This is how Overton windows fly. This is how things kind of move slowly over time. It's the frog in the pot and the boiling water analogy, right? So people have a very hard time thinking how anything could be different than it is. So, it's amazing to me sometimes how people are like, well, I can't imagine what it would be like if the government wasn't involved in education. It's like, well, they weren't always involved. Like, that did exist before. Like, there was a time when they weren't so involved. Like, there was a time when your healthcare wasn't tied to your employment, right? Like, but it's so far away from how things happen now that they can't even conceive of some of the stuff. So I think one advantage to being in a location that can start to serve as an example for what a free society looks like will actually help people understand these values and probably attract them to that place. So if if it's New Hampshire, you'll see people starting to look at like, oh, there is an alternative, and things actually seem to be working there, and actually this seems more moral, and I hadn't really thought of it that way, but this could work. And like, and you start to become what the United States was for most of its history, which was that kind of shining beacon on a hill that freedom lovers would
flock to,
swim through the ocean to get to, because they just wanted the freedom. You need that example. Because without that example, it's all talk, and people are kind of like, well, who would build the roads, and who would do this, and who would do that? And I don't understand. How could you not have the government do healthcare and blah, blah, blah. Like, they just don't get it because they just don't understand what it will be like to actually be responsible for yourself and let other people be responsible for themselves. But if they see it, it's very attractive. Even a small place like New Hampshire, I mean, look at Hong Kong. The Carla in the video compared New Hampshire to Hong Kong. She wants it to be like the Hong Kong of the East Coast or whatever. And New England, Hong Kong, I think she said. And look, Hong Kong it's a crappy little island with like no natural resources. It's in a good spot for shipping and banking, but it's not like Hong Kong was sitting on millions of tons of uranium next to millions of tons of gold next to a diamond mine. It's not that. But it was the freedom that made it the hub of Asia for a long, long time, and brought a tremendous amount of prosperity. And Americans moved to Hong Kong. Americans moved to Hong Kong because it was better. Like, it was, I mean, in many ways, it wasn't better in every way, but like, it was a pretty great place. So I think if you have something like that, you're not you're not stuck with just the people that are there. You're going to start attracting the best people from around the world to help you. And that, I think that's part of your defense, frankly, is that people look up to you and the best people start coming, and you'll have, like, prosperity is a good defense, right? You can afford more weapons, you can afford more security, you can afford to protect yourself more, you can withstand trade embargoes, you can fight to keep access to your ports. Like, there's things you can do if you've got money, and freedom begets prosperity.
Right. I mean, and your point about attracting some of the best people, and also you said earlier about getting allies. How do you do that when this sort of subversion that we're seeing in the United States is occurring in most of the major nations that you might get allies from?
Well, I mean, any recruiting effort will be possibly lost because, yeah, they're not going to want you to recruit allies. But it's hard to hide prosperity. Like, we are in an age where like people can install Signal and send messages to each other and have Telegram groups, and like we are beyond the age, even in China. I mean, I know I said it's possible to kind of kill these ideas earlier, and I think it is, like, to effectively kill them, but and you can wipe out books and stuff, but keeping hidden the success of a few million people in a very interesting place that seceded from the United States, I don't think it's going to be very possible to keep that success a secret. Yeah, it might not be as well known, but the best people are the people who are interested in that kind of thing and are finding out. And so I don't think they could keep it a complete secret. Could they release propaganda about how horrible it is? Yeah, there's like the reverse idea of Potemkin villages, right? They could be like, I'm sure they could film some slums in New York and be like, this is New Hampshire, it's a mess, people are dying on the streets, right? Like, I'm sure they can do all that kind of propaganda if they wanted to. But frankly, if they get caught doing that propaganda and there's information trickling out that's non-propaganda, their propaganda itself becomes an advertisement, because it means that they're so afraid of you finding out how good it is there that they need to turn their propaganda wheels and really work to make you believe that 2 + 2 is 5. Right. So, and that will work on some people, but the best minds, that will be an incentive. Like, you probably have this reaction too. If the government or like if statists tell me, don't read blah blah blah, what's my reaction?
You gotta go read it.
I gotta go read that. Like, what are you trying to hide? Like,
yep.
So the best people see through that, regardless of what it is. So, that's all right. We actually want the best people first.
True.
So,
on the propaganda front, I don't necessarily think it would take the form of reverse Potemkin. What's that word? Potemkin?
Potemkin villages.
That's
it might not. I was just okay. Yeah.
Because something that, I mean, the current form that communism is taking, you could very easily go, well, being as most New England states are like this, and also based off of voting patterns, I'd guess that it would end this way as well. It would probably be majority white. And so they could point to that and say, well, here's this racist state with a bunch of white nationalists gathering there, and the fact that we've reframed liberal values and Enlightenment values as being whiteness or white supremacy, you could easily throw that kind of propaganda at the state from the outside.
Yeah, but I mean, you can be... It doesn't matter what your race.
Oh,
if
I know,
you're smart and you're an individualist and you see that, you're like, I don't care that, like, I see that you're calling them white supremacists, but I also see that you're calling Enlightenment values white supremacy, so I'll go there.
Right.
I don't think that would deter anyone. I mean, among smarter people, and I mean like more informed people generally who are thinking about this, it's already a joke, regardless of those people's race. Like
Sure.
I know several different races of people who already think if you call someone a Nazi, they're like, okay, like, so they like freedom. Like, no one believes them anymore. Right. No one believes them anymore. They've ruined it. They're, you can't maintain a lie for very long. So the advantage we have is lies are weak. They have only lies. That's all they have. Their only intellectual ammunition is lies. So they've got lies. Yeah, maybe the lie could last for a little bit, but anyone with a little bit of intelligence sees through the lie after not very long, and the lie actually starts serving the opposite of its purpose, because now they're pointing to New Hampshire for you, saying we really hate this place and we're the opposite of what you want. So it becomes an advertisement in some way.
Right.
Even Potemkin villages, right? Like, there were leftists at the time in the U.S. who believed the Potemkin village stuff and were like, right, yeah, like, we want to go. But people on I'll say the non-left, like, they used it as an example of like, look how bad it is. You have to fake it. It's so bad that you have to fake it. You've got to get Walter Duranty to write a fake New York Times article and win a Pulitzer Prize for lying. And the smart people just said, okay, so the New York Times is in on it. Like, they just lost credibility. It didn't actually, I don't think anyone who cared about prosperity looked at that and said, I need to move to the Soviet Union. Right? Only people who already wanted to move to the Soviet Union used it as an example of something good. It didn't entice the other side.
Right.
They use it to justify it's used for indoctrination for kids and to justify themselves amongst the unthinking. And there will be a large percentage of the population, if this eventuality happens, there'll be a large percentage of the population that is fooled by that. But New Hampshire can't take 1 billion people anyway, so fine.
True.
We'd only get the people that are smart enough and dedicated enough to the Enlightenment principles to come. That sounds like utopia.
Right. And here's another question about that possible scenario. How do you stop the subversion of your state? Because so like I don't know if you remember, but like months ago I sent you the California creating ethnic studies at kindergarten through 12th grade stuff.
Yeah.
And how do you stop that sort of info from taking hold in the schools? Do you just make a populace that is so well versed that they dismiss it outright because they know it goes against their morals and values? What do you do there?
I don't know if you're going to like this answer, because this is the problem with the culture war and the war. I'll say war, but like and philosophy and the culture war. The problem is there's not quick answers to things.
Right.
The actual answer to that is you don't send kids to school. The government shouldn't be involved in school. Like, yeah, that's the answer. My daughter, I mean, I guess I'll say this, and if she turns into a social justice warrior in 5 years, everyone can mock me for being wrong, but my daughter's inoculated against this. There's no way she could go to Berkeley tomorrow. She's 11, and like, this isn't going to work on her. Mm-hmm. It's not going to work, because she's been taught to think for herself, use reason as her guiding, as her only means of acquiring knowledge about the world, and use her own judgment. And so like, this doesn't work. She sees through the arguments. If something is, if she's got questions about something, I don't indoctrinate her. We sit down and work through it and figure out, well, are they right or am I right? Like, maybe we're both wrong. But like, let's work through it. And I don't give her conclusions, but you know what conclusions she comes to? She comes to the rational conclusion. Like, she sees through this crap.
Right.
She knows that the prejudice plus power is a bullcrap definition of racism. She knows that it's racist to say you can't be racist against whites. Mm-hmm. Like, she's not dumb, and she's only 11, right? You don't, if you don't give your kids over to indoctrination and government schools, this stuff looks like the tripe that it is when they first encounter it after they've learned to critically think.
Critical thinking is upon one, and that is a good point. So it is what I had stated before, where just when they run into it, they dismiss it outright because they realize it is, bullshit.
Right, but you want to make sure they don't run into it when they are prior to developing their own critical faculties,
right,
and their own and not say don't run into it. You just don't want them to be indoctrinated. Like she ran into it throughout her life. There's been bits and pieces, but you don't look, if you're sending your kid to government schools, you are literally, you're a soldier factory for the enemy. That's what you're doing. And it's worse for you because you're going to love the soldiers that are out killing you, like, because they're your kids. So that's the hard conversation to have with people. People are like, well, what do I do? What do I do to stop the school from doing blah, blah, blah? And my blanket answer, yeah, you can try a lot of things. You can sue them. You can do this. You can do that. You can try and argue. But, that's like asking in Nazi Germany, what do I do to make sure that the Hitler Youth isn't at my school? Nothing.
Right.
You do nothing, right? You can't do anything. And you don't send your kid to school if you can get away with it. And I don't know if you could, probably not in Nazi Germany, but you can here. Almost every state allows you to homeschool. There's plenty of private schools. You don't have to send them there. So I actually think, and I know this is a radical statement, but literally, if you don't let them sit around and watch TV and play video games all day, literally staying home and doing nothing until they're 18 is better than sending them to school. They will learn how to cook their own food, clean their room, make their house, make their bed. They'll learn how to probably entertain themselves. They'll probably read. Maybe you let them watch some documentaries. Maybe they get involved in something that they like doing, like swimming or horseback riding or whatever it is. They will be better off. And I'm literally talking about zero. I'm not talking about homeschooling. I'm talking about literally nothing. If you're the laziest person in the world, that's better than sending them to school.
Right, because at least then you're not absorbing the propaganda.
Right, they can learn math later if they have to, right? And frankly, they'll learn math if they have to just, if they have an allowance and they have to buy stuff or they have to do like the basic life skills. If someone gets to the point of being 18 years old and they can critically think and they have basic life skills, that's a win. Now, it's not the biggest win. There's a lot better that you could do. But compared to having gone through a government indoctrination program, they're way better off. Way better off. And I'm not suggesting you do absolutely nothing. I mean, you should do more than that. But even nothing is better.
No, and I get exactly what you're saying. I went through a government school for most of my education. And, I look back at so I was in the Matrix. I was in the social justice mindset for right up until sophomore year of college, which is about 3 years ago.
When did it start, by the way? When did you start getting in that social justice mindset?
I read the Communist Manifesto when I was 16. And
that did it for you, huh?
Well, that was one of the things. I mean, I already had passively absorbed it from being in public schools for so long, but I was of the idea that a lot of people following the movement are that this is the way to be a good person. This is the way to help people, as it's always framed.
Right, of course.
And so I started really jumping into it. Reading the Communist Manifesto helped. Watching a lot of The Daily Show with Jon Stewart also helped. Slowly absorbing opinions from teachers and stuff. I mean, luckily, during high school, I went to a Catholic school, which didn't have nearly as much of the indoctrination in it, thinking back, as the public schools did. But at the time, I was rebelling against that sort of way of thinking. I mean, I was reading LaVey's Satanic Bible in the back of my religion class because I was an atheist.
Right.
So I had also, in doing so, wanted to rebel even more against conservative ideals, which is what led me to Communist Manifesto, that way of thinking. I was we'll say, old school leftist, those which care about economics more than social issues, up until college. And then freshman year, I dated a feminist and took a critical thinking class where 2/3 of it was actually critical theory.
Which is the opposite.
Yes, exactly. And I realize that now. But back then, it's like, oh, I'm learning about all these great philosophers like Horkheimer and Habermas and Adorno. This is interesting. And I go back and read my essays from back then, and it disgusts me.
Well, that's personal growth, buddy. That's
right. But yeah, I mean, the thing that broke me out of it really was I had found Peterson by accident before he became who he was. I was listening and reading a lot of Alan Watts, which pointed me to Carl Jung, which then pointed me to Peterson and his lectures before he took his stand against Bill C-16 and all that. And I also might have accidentally broken myself out of the Matrix by engaging in hallucinogenic episodes on LSD.
That's the best argument I've ever heard for hallucinogens. So.
Yes. I don't recommend it because they're not for everyone, but it definitely worked for me. It made me question a whole hell of a lot of stuff. And one of those things was, and this is why I talked about the linguistic propaganda earlier, it made me start really critically thinking about the various words that were being used around me and the way that people were employing them not to seek truth but to gain power. After that, I went down the rabbit hole of reading as much material as I could on the subjects and finding out where the ideology came from. And two of the most important books that I ran into during my junior year was The Sacred Project of American Sociology by Christian Smith. Smith is a sociologist of religion, and he had noticed in like 2011, 2012 that a lot of his domain of sociology could be called a faith in the way that people were practicing. And I mean, we're seeing the outgrowth of that now. He just happened to notice it from the inside back then.
So he had the courage to admit it, which I don't think a lot of sociologists would have.
Yes, and he took a lot of flack for it even back then. The other one is The Critical Turn in Education by Isaac Grotzman. This one is a bit more of... The Sacred Project is easy to jump into, regardless of your knowledge of philosophy. The Critical Turn in Education is a bit more of a high theoretical work, but it's been published or pieces of it have been published in 2 sociology journals, so it makes it as academic as something of this nature could be. And what it does is trace the Marxist subversion of the universities from basically the 50s onward. It talks about various thinkers. It talks about the various theories. The subtitle of it is From Marxist Critique to Post-Structuralist Feminism to Critical Theories of Race.
Oh, that sounds like a great book.
Yes. And it's relatively short, too. I mean, I think it's like 150 pages or something like that.
Oh, wow.
But each area that he does history in, he'll bring up the main thinkers of it. He'll bring up the major theories that they came up with. And he's a true believer. So, it's written by someone who is not biased against it for it. He's talking about the critical turn as if it's a great thing and every school should be going through it.
Yep. Well, I mean, if you look at even, I mean, they were pretty obvious about it. Like if you read Marcuse, for example, like he's clearly like his premise is that basically like a neo-Marxist premise, like this is where we should go. And all of his quote philosophy all of his writings, which I guess philosophy, he's got some philosophical concepts in there.
Right.
All of his philosophy is built around how to get to Marxism,
Yes.
with Marxism as the neo-Marxism as the premise, and everything else is just how do we get there? And he explicitly talks about taking over institutions. Like it's like, oh, he's a little bit of an elitist, right? So he'll say, well, the intellectuals have to do this because the regular people are all indoctrinated and they don't get it, and this is the failure of democracy, and we can't, free exchange of ideas actually doesn't work because too many people are indoctrinated, but the intellectuals can lead, and like we're the ones who need to basically take over the institutions as much as possible and break out of this kind of meta narrative that's happening. He was pretty, like, they're all pretty clear about it. And it's what's funny to me is in mainstream, if you say, oh, the Marxists took over academia, they act like you're Alex Jones. And it's like, well, have you never read them? Because like they literally said that's what we're doing and then proceeded to do it.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, if you can just get that sense from going through and reading like any gender studies 101 summary on any of the university websites, you're going to see, oh, we produce activists. That's interesting. And we're dismantling systems of oppression, and capitalism happens to be one of those. Well, that's kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Teaching people to get rid of liberal values within a liberal arts college. It's a little strange there.
Only if words have meanings, which, as we've realized, they do not. Beyond their manipulation value. That's the meaning of words to modern leftists. So
and that sort of using them for power and that urge for power. You brought up Marcuse earlier, and he's a really great example of it. His whole doctrine of repressive tolerance was just to gain power over the culture.
Absolutely. And actually, when I read that essay in particular, to me, it's just proto-social justice very clearly. Oh, yes. It's like, oh, this is very clearly social justice. Like there's a few tweaks, but he's exactly got the power dynamic thing going on, and he connects it to old school Marxism, because he still has sort of a classist power dynamics, but he does mention race and other stuff, and like, it's very clear, like this is the template. This is the template that's been used.
Yep. Another work, which, I mean, you might be aware of it because of Douglas Murray. He's how I found out about it originally. But I think it's Hegemony and Socialist Strategy, or Socialist Strategy and Hegemony. It's written by Laclau and Moff, and it basically takes Antonio Gramsci's idea of cultural hegemony, dissects it a little bit, and then the last 2 or 3 chapters are about breaking the United States cultural hegemony, or the capitalist control of the institutions, by subverting the women's and racial movements that were going on at the time.
Oh, I should read that one. I haven't read it.
It was written... Oh, sorry for interrupting.
No.
It was written in 85, if I remember correctly, and if you go on Google Scholar, you'll see that it's been cited over 20,000 times. So it's a little influential.
So yeah, people have read it.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a pretty crazy world, and I know a lot of people can get they can get overwhelmed by all of this, because I don't recommend the average person like go start reading Horkheimer and, God forbid, Derrida or something like that. Like, don't go. Well, I guess Derrida's postmodern, not Frankfurt School, but like I don't recommend people go do that stuff. But it is interesting if you're interested in the philosophy. I'm still learning a lot about it. But for everyone else, I kind of feel like I don't know that we even really need to be having these arguments with the leftists. I think we give them too much stature by pretending that their ideas are based on anything that's not nonsense. Their ideas are explicitly based on it. First of all, it's not that there was philosophy. It's not that someone was worried about morality and arrived at Marxism as the solution, and it happens to be that Marxism is the answer. It's that Marxists were frustrated, like Marcuse and like neo-Marxists were frustrated that the proletariat hadn't risen up and overthrown the government and instituted communism. And so, well, we need a bunch of tools to justify Marxist takeover, Marxist revolution. And parts of philosophy spent the next couple of decades just developing tools for that political end. So if that's what you understand about it, you don't really need to bother arguing with, they could ad infinitum invent random tools. It's a never ending battle. You can dismiss it at the very top by saying your explicit purpose is just Marxism. Marxism's wrong. I don't agree with Marxism. It's immoral. Here are the reasons it's immoral. I don't need to listen to your hogwash about, discourses and, lived experience and the oppressions and power dynamics between groups. None of that matters because all of it is developed in service to an immoral goal.
Mm-hmm. And the main reason why I went into reading as much about this is so that I don't know if you ever saw it, but in I think 2017, Pluckrose, Boghossian, and Lindsay gave a talk. The video was entitled "Is Social Justice a Religion?" or something like that. And in it, Peter is asked by one of the students, how do you combat this? And he says, by engaging in street corner epistemology. And so ever since then, I've been trying to practice that. And the whole reason that I read through all the philosophy and everything was because if you approach normal people, granted, they don't have to know any of the philosophy. But if you can break down in simple terms what these ideas mean and where they come from, it makes it a lot easier, at least in my experience, for people to reject them.
Yep. No, I'm not disagreeing with that. If you have the capability and interest like you do to do it, absolutely. But I'm not just saying I don't think it's a false. It's false to believe that the only way, that you're somehow being dishonest or incomplete by dismissing them because you haven't read all of the philosophers. That's not necessary. Mm-hmm. It's not. That's all I'm saying. But it is helpful to be better at convincing people. Absolutely. I think you're right.
Oh yeah. And just as a quick thing, when you mentioned if you say the Marxists took over the university, you're seen as insane. One of the best tools that I've found to counteract that is that Critical Turn in Education book that I talked about, because it explicitly traces them doing that over the course of the last 50 years.
It brags.
Yes, exactly. And it's an academic work by any standard because it was published in journals. So you can just cite that and say, well, here's someone saying that's exactly what happened. He's got the academic credentials. He's been published. He's got everything down, and he's a true believer at that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and he's coming from he thinks it's a good thing, right? Mm-hmm. He's not coming from the conspiracy theory angle. He's thinking this is great.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Alan, I hope this call was helpful. Are there any other things you want to chat about before we wrap it up?
I don't have too much else. I definitely enjoyed it, and I like the other options that you provided, as well as talking a bit more about Pinochet and his faults. I think this could definitely be an interesting series that you're putting together here, talking to the members of the community, because it's a good way to do community outreach, so to speak.
There's a lot of people like you who've read interesting things. You've got interesting opinions, and I can learn something from every episode like this. So it could be fun. We'll see if people like it, but I do. I enjoy it.
I appreciate that, and I'm also looking forward to seeing James Lindsay on here again later today. I think is when that one's supposed to come out, because that dude is one of my major intellectual heroes.
he's great.
Oh yeah. And watching
he's live, so
okay.
So don't miss him today. We'll be live.
Right.
So,
cool.
Maybe we'll get into some of the stuff that you and I just talked about. So.
Right. Hopefully.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's about all I got.
All right. Well, thanks, Alan. I appreciate it, and I have no idea when this will be up, but I appreciate it, and have a good day.
Yeah, you too, Carter. Have a great one.
Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, at least for now, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to it. For your protection, the following co-conspirators have been unpersoned and marked for cancellation. Please avoid any contact with these individuals. Twitter tells me there is a 98.2% chance that these are all Russian bots. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Pay no attention to doctors who disagree with bureaucrats at Facebook and YouTube. Computer voice Curtis, never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.